And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thank you so much for joining us on another news review, another fun week. And it's wonderful to have Lois McLatchie Miller with us once again. Lois, thanks so much for joining us today.
Of course. No, it's great to be here again.
Good to be with you. You were with us, I think, a few months ago, looking maybe a bit more at the work on ADF, but it's great to have you to give your thoughts on all the news that has been happening. And of course, people can find you. That is your Twitter handle at the bottom. People can find you there, and I would encourage everyone to go and follow the work that you do, the work on Christian freedoms, I think specifically, but a whole range of topics there. So make sure and go and have a look at that. But our first story, which I think fits in, is how Christians are treated in the media. And I think that, generally, but here was a great article by Anne Widdecombe. Anne Widdecombe, a long-time political influencer. One place I saw, they talked about her doing the dancing program. Thinking, now that she's known for politics, but Christians in politics treated terribly. The UK should be utterly ashamed. Christians face a secular inquisition, especially from so-called liberals who claim to champion equality and inclusion, says Anne Widdecombe. And part of this is from David Campanoli, who was with the Lib Dems and has been removed because of his Christian views. And I think that's something we're seeing more and more. But what are your thoughts as a Christian, not really in the political space, but obviously you're watching what happens in politics. Is it possible to be a Christian any longer in politics?
What a big question. I think we've seen similar stories actually across all major parties, haven't we, of people being condemned and shunned for having Christian views, for having views about a woman being a woman in this day and age. And of course, the most recent example of a Christian being kind of tormented for their beliefs is up in Scotland with Kate Forbes, who is very well known to be a Christian, although she considers herself part of the left in the SNP. And so she's had a big challenge with the media attacking her for her religious beliefs rather than looking at her policies and her proposals to lead Scotland with. So I think we do certainly have an issue of cultural discrimination against people with these kinds of beliefs. Obviously, you're kind of allowed to have any other belief in politics without any issues. But Christianity seems to be one that's particularly unpopular. I think that's to a great detriment. Not only is it, no matter what you believe, it's good to have a diversity of thought in society. It's good to have different voices and opinions and perspectives thrown into the conversation, because as we know, nobody, no politician, no person is religion free. We all have a set of values, a set of beliefs, whether they're based on Christianity or not. And so it's important to make sure that's varied, to make sure that there's different perspectives chipping in when we make decisions for everybody in our country. But also it's a shame because we know that Christianity offers a lot to our country. It offers, it is the underpinning thought of the human rights framework. It's because of Christianity that we have concepts like equality between men and women. In ancient Rome, they used to throw baby girls onto dustbin heaps to get rid of them because they didn't believe in equality. They treated people as slaves with masters, and they didn't have that concept of every person being equal just because they're human. Now, it was Christianity that revolutionized that treated women with respect, and it's Christianity that inspired later great men like William Wilberforce to overturn slavery and to ensure that principle of equality. So we know throughout history, Christianity has a lot to offer our country, and it would be good to allow that space again for it to influence and to have a say, a narrative in our politics.
But it does seem to be across the board. So it's not pointing fingers at any. Tim Farron obviously stepped down. He said you couldn't be a leader of the Lib Dems. Katie Forbes up in Scotland, the SNP, and a candidate who could do the job, had the experience, but yeah, because of her Christian belief was attacked. And then you look at the front benches in Westminster and you don't find many Christians. And it does seem to be a change. And as you said in TNT the other day, that actually it's reflecting the society, I think.
Yeah, that's right. The parliament we have is a reflection on who we've voted for. So as Christianity becomes less popular in our country, we know from the census data in 2021 that now less than half of our country identify as Christians, and I do suspect it's probably less than that in reality. So we don't have a country that is majority Christian anymore, and that's why we're encountering policies where people are being arrested for praying silently in their heads. It's why during lockdowns churches were closed for much longer than in Scotland. Bicycle shops and liquor stores and other things. There is an assumption that we don't need Christianity anymore, but I think that leaves a space open for the next generation to resume an interest in Christianity that wasn't perhaps there amongst their parents, and to rediscover that. I think there is a cultural yearning again for faith and for something that is not something that is beautiful and true, rather than what we've had served up to us in recent years.
I agree. Even atheism is a worldview. It's just a belief in nothing. So rather believe in something if there is something to be believed in, which is Christianity. There's a post you retweeted, and we're not giving economic advice, but Rishi Sunak said, one thing is certain, if Labour get into power, your finances are going to be hammered. And you'd put, just when they were doing so well. And it does read, your comment kind of reflected exactly what I was thinking, that actually, what do you mean that if someone gets some power, either or, that it'll be worse? I mean, could it be any worse? Could inflation be any higher? Could the cost of buying a car or going and getting a loaf of bread or a pint of milk, just a range of them, it's all so expensive. So it does seem to be everything has got more expensive, and I'm not sure whether any other party would be worse or better.
Right. Well, that's why I always encourage people to look individually at the candidates that they have in their own local constituencies, because in each party there are some that represent Christian values. There are some that would fight for free speech and for other things that are important to us. And so it's really important to write to your MP ahead of an election to ask them their view on these things, how they intend to vote on these issues in the coming years, and make sure that we get a parliament full of parliamentarians that are good, rather than necessarily putting our faith in a wide-ranging broad church party, which most of those parties that we have before us would represent.
No, I agree. And we're just I think we're going to stick generally to what's happened in the UK. I know over stateside, you've had your wonderful debate between two presidential candidates, and I've watched some of that. We have the same snooze fest here in the UK, but we'll not even get into that. But one thing that's been in the news is David Tennant and his comments about Kemi Badenoch, MP, who actually could have not been leader of the Conservative Party if any polling is to be believed. But here is David Tennant, obviously was Doctor Who in the hit BBC series, and he was attacking Kemi. And here are just David's 20 seconds of thoughts.
Live in a world where that is worth remarking on. However, until we wake up and Kemi Badenoch doesn't exist anymore, I don't wish ill of her, I just wish her to shut up.
So, telling a woman to shut it, yeah, interesting. Those are at the LGBT awards. The whole concept we'll touch on a little bit later of actually, what is a woman? What is a man? Simple questions, but obviously not. But David Tennant, yeah, just if you don't like someone else's views, just tell them to shut up. I thought we were an inclusive society.
Right. It really is a clip that exposes the double standards of cancel culture, isn't it? Now, if I could imagine for a second if somebody with conservative views was to say of a liberal woman that she should just shut up, I can only imagine the Guardian headlines today and how that would be perceived. And yet somehow, because it's the other way around, the same standards of play don't seem to apply. I think it's a very sad state of affairs. I mean, we've known this for a while, that our culture doesn't work like this. But of course, we should be attacking arguments with arguments, ideas with ideas, and not going after individual people on a platform like that David Tennant has. And yet he has done. And I think that's a very sorry state of our culture, that's what our culture wars are left to, is just taking swipes at one another on stage. And of course, Kemi Badenoch has famously fought for underscoring women's rights. She has championed the idea of biological sex being a reality, and has spoken about the need for that as women, to have our own spaces, access to privacy in locker rooms, in prison cells, wherever it is where the vulnerable spaces are, in rape crisis centres. There's clear and obvious spaces in society where it just makes sense that single sex applies. And Kemi's been a champion for that. She's a woman in Parliament, and that's one of the causes that is close to her heart. And yet David Tennant has not listened whatsoever to what she's saying, and has not understood that need for a woman's safety and privacy.
And it's it. I mean, there are two things interesting. One is where we've descended into just abuse of other people. We no longer listen to points of view. Whoever can scream the loudest actually wins. That's it. But also on the Kemi side, it's interesting because obviously her background and her parents from Nigeria. And it's interesting where you look at, certainly as a Christian, going to a black majority church, you see Christians from countries that actually, back in the British Empire, missionaries went to those countries, and now you have those individuals coming back to the UK and reminding us, actually, this is your heritage. And I love having Kemi in Parliament, speaking truth and not being afraid. And you kind of look around, is there anyone else kind of behind her, with her? I've really enjoyed Kemi speaking out robustly many times on these issues of freedoms, women's rights especially.
Yeah, the liberal side, the left side, if you want to call them that, they really panic when they have someone who doesn't fit their mold. We say trust women, but not that kind of woman with that kind of beliefs. We want to give a platform and a voice to people of racial minorities. Oh no, when they're Nigerian and Kemi Badenoch and she has a viewpoint that doesn't fit the narrative, then we want her to be silent. And it just exposes the ridiculousness of identity politics. We need to get back to hearing people's voices and opinions and views and weighing them up on their merit, and not playing different identity cards to try and trump people having points over one another in the debate. I think this is really exposed and brought to the fore where we're at with this, and I hope that once we're sunk to the bottom, we can start to find a way to debate each other better, have better discussions in our culture.
Well, let's touch what Rishi Sunak had said about free speech. And actually, the thing I love most was reading the comments underneath. So I encourage the viewers, listeners to go jump on this tweet by Rishi Sunak and actually read the comments, because they are quite disparaging of his time. But freedom of speech is the most powerful feature of our democracy. If you're calling for women to shut up and wishing they didn't exist, you are the problem. I'm not sure if David Tennant is actually the problem. It does seem to be the politicians are also part of the problem wherever you look. So what were your thoughts whenever you saw this up? Because we hear politicians saying a lot, claiming they'll do a lot, but actually delivery is proof of the pudding, and we don't see much delivery on any of these.
Well, indeed, my running criticism of the most recent government was that they protected free speech in word but not deed. As you can see, Rishi has, this is not the first time that he has publicly claimed to support free speech, especially when it's a particularly opportune moment to do so in the news. However, when we look at what's happened under the last 14 years, we see free speech has eroded at a greater pace than in the last century. We see that Isabel Van Spruce has been arrested for silently praying in her head. She's not the only person to have been censored for her thoughts. We know ADF International of at least 4 others who are facing criminal charges, going through courts right now because they either offered help, a helpful conversation, a consensual conversation with somebody near an abortion facility, or they prayed even just inside their own heads. Now, that's one issue. We also have seen a great rise in censorship and cancel culture over the last 14 years, whether that's people losing employment opportunities, platforms for voicing their perspectives. Now, of course, there has to be significant debate within society, and there will be some views that the natural boundaries of the Overton window will shut out. But we need to have as much legal protection for open conversations on issues that are new to us, that are emerging as possible. And it's up to politicians to preserve that space. This isn't just a problem in the UK. I mean, well, in England, in Scotland, for example, we brought in a notoriously censorial hate speech law just recently, and we had a wonderful government campaign with the hate monster telling us not to be hateful and to behave ourselves and not to raise any troublesome points of view. And there was a great spike of thousands of complaints after that law went in about J.K. Rowling's views being potentially offensive, and indeed even Hamza Yousaf's views being offensive to other people in Scotland. And so you see this rise of censorship, a rise of attempts to use the law to shut conversation down. The same, very similar law is being debated right now in Ireland. It's already been rolled out in Finland and other countries across the world, Mexico. We see these cases cropping up as we go, with people who are criminalized, put on trial for tweeting very respectable points of view about gender or marriage or faith. And so this is a trend we have to be watching. It's significant to be raising these stories, and I encourage people to read them and share them when they see them, because winning this in the court of public opinion, getting as many people on board with the idea of having open conversation as a good thing in our society, will go a long way to then impacting the politics as we move forward.
And I think in past generations, we've expected the church to be involved on these issues. We've maybe expected the media to be involved on these common sense issues. But now more and more, I mean, you work for ADF, I've worked for Christian Concern before. You've got CI, you've got CARE, you've got lobby organizations and also legal organizations that seem to have to step into the mix more and more often. And it does seem to be a complete change of who you'd expect, or who we have traditionally seen standing up for common sense freedoms. We now have to have organizations doing it. And that's certainly a big step change, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. But hopefully the idea with all these organizations is that they can not only engage members of the public and get this to be a big kind of issue in the media. When we have stories and cases that break, when people are arrested or charged or treated poorly by police for voicing a legitimate point of view. If we can get these into the media and people to speak about them, that's already a huge win in our culture, to bring that pushback. And that in turn can influence legislation. It influences policymakers when they see the public discourse and see the amount of people within our country that do still believe in free speech, which is a significant amount. So I'm encouraged by the number of organizations who are working on this, and I hope that can bring efforts into fruition in the next few years.
Well, we've nudged on the Lib Dems about freedom of speech with that Anne Whitcomb article. We've taken some potshots at Rishi Sunak. Let's bring Labour up. This is an interview, just I think in 2 minutes. We'll listen the whole 2 minutes because it is difficult to listen to. Bridget Phillipson, Labour MP, on with Nick Ferrari on LBC radio programme, and she's been asked, which toilet should someone use? And so listen to this, and it is blood-curdlingly difficult to actually listen to someone explain something which is nonsense and try and make sense of it. So here it is.
A trans woman with a penis would use which lavatory?
Well, look, I think it's important that all people feel safe and have dignity.
No, but she needs to go to the lavatory. Which one does she use?
I think there are a range of options that would.
Well, she hasn't got a range of options, respectfully. She's got a door with a woman on it, and she's got a door with a bloke on it. Which one does she go in, Bridget Phillipson?
Well, many businesses and many public buildings also provide the option.
Yes, sadly, this restaurant only has one with a picture of a woman and a picture of a man. So which door does she go through?
Well, I would expect they would have a range of different options.
No, this restaurant doesn't. It's just got the two. So which one does she use?
I would want people to treat one another with respect.
She needs to use the lavatory, Shadow Secretary of State. Which one is she to use?
I would hope that person, whoever they would happen to be, trans person, it's not clear, would...
Well, it is. It's a trans woman with a penis, and she's desperate to go to the loo, and she's really getting desperate now.
I I wouldn't want that person to feel at risk. Equally, I wouldn't want biological women to feel intimidated.
So where does she go?
Space. It's about seeking common sense solutions and being practical about it. I would hope that they might be able to, for example, try and find a compromise where no one.
So she's got to leave the restaurant to find somewhere else, is what we're saying.
No, I would expect that a business would provide a range of different options so that all people, biological women and trans women, can find a way so that no one feels that their safety or dignity is compromised. And I do think where it comes to trans people within our society, I understand the challenges that the long process that many people will have gone through in order to be recognised in a gender different to the biological sex into which they were born. That is not a short process, that is an extensive...
But you seem to have checked earlier this week, you said she should use the female toilet, didn't you?
Look, these. I want to make sure that everyone, where it comes to this discussion, that we have this discussion in a way that is respectful and seeks to find common ground.
So, Lois, that was difficult to watch, excruciating when you think, actually, there's a simple answer to this question. What is a woman? And it does kind of concern me when a woman doesn't know what a woman is. So tell us what your thoughts are on that. Maybe you can enlighten us.
Well, I think what was going wrong in that clip is just too much effort to not offend either side and to be finding this middle path that just simply doesn't exist. And I think we can have care and respect for everybody, no matter what their beliefs, but that doesn't mean compromising on safety and common sense. I had a moment recently. I mean, people can kind of laugh at the bathroom issue and say, "Oh, you know what? It's just toilets. What are we really panicking about?" But I think there is a misunderstanding about how much more safety conscious and safety aware women have to be in general life. I was at a local park in London recently, and I had to use the public bathrooms, which I don't normally like to do. But while I was in there, and it was empty, I did think to myself, this could be a situation was if there was a male in here that was, and any male of any persuasion was to come and attack me, nobody would necessarily know. It is a very vulnerable space. I wouldn't necessarily be able to call out very loud to anyone around me. And I did think, okay, this is the kind of example that we're talking about. It's not about being ridiculous about it. It's not about gatekeeping. It's about a basic reality that we need to be safe, we need our spaces. And that extends, of course, into other areas of life, whether that is prison cells or rape crisis centers or anywhere else. It's just logical, it's common sense, and it needs to be protected.
And you kind of go through Parliament, you see Emily Pankhurst, someone who fought for women having the right to vote, and you think of what society has been like in terms of segregation, in terms of colour, in terms of male-female, and now we come to a point where actually there did seem to be a level of equality, equal opportunity, certainly. Maybe positive discrimination, but that's a whole other area. But it's crazy how we've had 14 years of government have pushed this, and it seems to Labour just want to push it further. And you're right. Where does it leave women in those vulnerable situations, or girls actually in changing rooms in school? Should they then be concerned? And of course, if the parent raises an issue of their young daughter being in somewhere with a boy who says they're a girl, then actually it'd be the parent that could find themselves in hot water for it. And the danger is that people keep quiet because they don't want the law to come down on them.
That's right. No, there's definitely a culture of censorship around the issue, which is a terrible shame when we're talking about something so important. I was at the UN this week with Sharon Davies, who's an Olympian swimming legend, and she was talking to a room full of diplomats and others about how she and other women had fought back in the 80s to ensure that women had their own rights in their own races, that they weren't competing against people who, at the time, there was a big scandal about women cheating with testosterone injections. And before that, women had to fight even to have their own categories, because obviously males have a physical advantage, which is just going to lead to a situation where no women would win any medals or opportunities in sport ever, because they would never have the advantage to win. And so that was something that was fought on a common sense basis, and it was something that was awarded to women as part of their rights. And now we're in a situation that's being taken away, and it doesn't affect men. Men still have their own races to compete in, their own categories, but it does mean that men who are not able to compete in those categories and win are able to then go into the women's category instead and have that advantage and very likely succeed where women should be.
Just a real quick, because I saw your pictures over in the UN, and how you kind of see things in Europe, because there does seem to be a bit of a pushback against it. We've maybe seen a pushback possibly from reform in the UK, but other parties seem to want to continue down this path, although the Conservatives say they'll do things different, but they've done it for 14 years. So I'm not sure whether it's easy to believe they change course. But then across Europe, there seems to be a lot of pushback on the woke agenda. I mean, it is about immigration, but it's also about the woke agenda. Do you think actually people are beginning to say enough is enough, and politicians are also listening because one's been elected in actually will stand up and say we can't have this coming in our country, our schools?
I think there's certainly early signs of that, isn't there? Now, I do think the UK is probably in one of the best places in the world in terms of the protecting women's rights issue, because we've had moments like the Tavistock Clinic being shut down, and we've had J.K. Rowling speaking out for years now, kind of leading the troops on this debate. And we've had, many cultural moments. Maya Forstater winning her case and her right to be able to speak at work about her gender critical beliefs. And so we've kind of trailblazed in Europe, I think, on being able to keep this debate open, be able to protect women's rights when it comes to this issue, and be able to, of course, protect confused children who are being pushed into lifelong bodily harm because of this very offensive ideology that tells them that they are born in the wrong body. So I think the UK is actually doing pretty well culturally on this specific issue. I think in Europe, I haven't seen as many cultural moments that have quite happened in those countries, but we have obviously seen election results which have pushed back against some very liberal parties. I think one further example is in Ireland, although it was known to be, as you'll know, one of the more progressive countries in Europe, and always kind of going for the next most liberal thing. In their referendum a few months ago, the people actually voted to keep the word mothers in the constitution and keep that state recognition of motherhood and womanhood at its core. And I think that was a real moment of the Irish people standing up and saying enough is enough. A woman is a woman, and we do have respect for mothers and the role that they play in society. So we're not there yet. We've still got a lot of work to do, but I think that people are starting to wake up to the reality of how harmful this ideology is and are starting to raise a voice against it.
Yeah, and that was a pleasant surprise, I think, over in Ireland. And we talked about the trans thing with children, and Lawrence Fox put this up. Dear celebrities, there's no such thing as a trans child. And Billboard Chris goes around saying children cannot consent to puberty blockers. And the UK does seem to have woken up on this. The US seemingly is still pushing down this path. And we've woken up the fact that there are no long-term studies on any of these drugs given to children. But as Lawrence says, dear celebrities, you've got a massive push among celebrities seemingly using their children in this ideological debate. And that speaks volumes. And they seem to be part of the bandwagon that's driving this.
Yeah, that's right, isn't it? And it's kind of a typical thing we see amongst Hollywood, to be chasing what looks like the most popular thing to say, especially in a culture like America, where there's only two tribes, and you want to be the chief of at least one of those tribes. You've got to fit with the popular narrative. But I think there will come, in not too distant a future, we're already seeing parents just absolutely fight back because their child was not born in the wrong body. We have to stop telling children this, because they are made wonderfully, and we have to support them to feel comfortable in their own skin and not to be taking life-altering drugs, life-altering surgery to any other point. I think there is going to be some lawsuits that come up in the next few years where parents and children and detransitioners who have been through this journey and have been led down a path beyond or contrary to their best, the best care of themselves, have been led down a path into this damage, and there will be lawsuits that follow. And I think if that happens, that will be a very significant end to a trend that has been affecting us for so long. So I don't know how much longer the celebrities will want to keep being champions of this movement. We'll see.
We'll see, and I think certainly Chloe Cole and others talking about detransitioning, and that's a discussion that has been had more and more. So we need to pray for that to be, I think, covered more and more by the mainstream media. But there's another issue on the agenda, and this is a simple tweet. Abortion is not healthcare. 4 little words that actually are absolute common sense and yet go against everything that we have had across the world, really. There isn't really an exception to this drive towards abortion. How is abortion taking the life of an unborn child? How has abortion become termed and categorized as healthcare?
It's absolute propaganda, isn't it, to change our culture and make something seem good and helpful, which is actually entirely destructive. Abortion is not healthcare because pregnancy is not a disease, and we need to stop treating it as that. We have become a culture which maligns motherhood, which tells women their lives are over if they are to become parents, which tells them they will not succeed, that they cannot have a career, they do not have the social support, whatever it is, if they do this scary thing and continue their pregnancy. But of course, if we look at the science, if we look at the medical knowledge of that life in them, and we know that a child is already being created. And so the kind and good thing to do as a society is to rally around that mother and her child to support both lives and create a society where she feels empowered to continue her journey in motherhood, instead of making her feel that she has the best option available on the table is to have this abortion.
Yeah, both lives matter. In fact, all 3 lives matter. The life of father, in fact, the whole family matters. The life of grandparents, and it's a whole unit. And to see girls being encouraged down an avenue that actually there is no return from when it's done, it's done. But how has this been framed in? We have a general election next week on the 4th. How is this topic being framed or discussed within any debate in politicians or parties?
I don't think any politician is making it their foremost campaign item, probably because it is a very cultural hot topic. So I don't think we'll see much talk about abortion in the next few weeks from our politicians. But we are aware that the consequences of the next election could be huge, because abortion at birth was on the table only a few weeks ago, right before the election was called. There was politicians calling to decriminalize abortion for women all the way up through 40 weeks, so that putting them in a situation where they could be at home performing an abortion on themselves on a very late term developed, capable of life baby at, say, 32, 35, 37 weeks old. And in fact, we saw that does happen in the case of Carla Foster last summer, that this is a trauma that some women have subjected to themselves to. The law is there to protect them from going through this and to protect the life of their child, which at that stage is fully developed and capable of life and should be given every opportunity to do so. So we know that when things settle again, that it's very likely that this issue will be brought to the fore once again. We had those amendments up to birth. We also had some politicians calling for our abortion law in the UK to be made more humane. Right now it sits at 24 weeks. Some politicians wanted it to be brought down to 22 weeks or even 18 weeks. Obviously incremental steps, but still of significance in our very pro-abortion culture. So it's on the minds of politicians, but probably not on their mouths. And it is important, once again, to be asking your local representatives before you go to vote what their view is on this. It might not be in their manifesto, but they will have a view. And so do find out how they would intend to vote in such a situation, if they would want to raise the limit all the way up to birth, or if they would want to lower it to something more humane, because that can really inform your choices.
I mean, very few people would say abortion is a good option, and yet it seems to be the only option. And in a parliamentary 5-year we have 1 million lives have been taken, 1 million babies have been killed. Is it the abortion industry? Because with the trans, it is partially about finance as well as a crazy outlook, a confused worldview. Is it finance that also is part of the drive in abortion?
It certainly could be the case, and it's more the case in America, where Planned Parenthood make an immense profit from these abortions. Of course, there are still people who do profit in the UK from abortion, although many of those are charities, and the money goes back into performing more abortions. So it's a little bit of a different situation in England. But I think at core, this comes out of it's a lie sold to a convenience culture. When abortion was introduced back in the 60s and 70s, we were told it would be empowering. It would be my body, my choice. But what it's really done is allowed men to turn around and say, your body, your choice, your issue. It's allowed families who are always meant to be there to support women in times of crisis to say your body, your choice, your issue. And it's left women with a burden that was always meant to be shared rather than put on them alone. And so it's really disturbed women, this abortion culture. It's disturbed men. It's disturbed the institution of marriage, where we're meant to be caring for each other and supporting new life in this world and taking responsibility as mothers and fathers. It's been incredibly detrimental. And as I often say, no little girl wants to have an abortion when she grows up. It's not something that is viewed as a good or something that we want to do in our lives. And yet 1 in 3 of us in the UK will have an abortion in our lifetime. So something is going wrong. Whether whatever opinion you have about life in the womb and where it begins, we have to look at this without ideological lenses on and say something is going wrong in our culture. If 1 in 3 women feel that they have abortion as their best option, we need to do better to serve our most vulnerable citizens.
Yeah, there has to be a better way, and encourage the viewers and listeners to do the conversation with your representatives. If you do manage to engage them, if they do knock on your door, ask them when life begins, and see them squirm, just like the "what is a woman" debate. Here's an article on, and it shows kind of the awful situation on how the law treats women who have been raped. And here in Germany, women convicted of offending migrant gang rapist receives longer prison sentences than the rapist. A 20-year-old woman, Hamburg, sent to prison after making hateful remarks towards a migrant who was involved in the gang rape of a child. The woman is just one of 140 people being investigated for making harmful comments towards the rapists. And I see this, with the whole grooming gang issue, you see some of those individuals, multiple counts of rape with children, and they are charged, sentenced, imprisoned. And a lot of them are doing 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and even getting out in half that time. The shortest one I've seen is maybe 5 years for 2 counts. And this whole issue of rape, it's 1.5% of an allegation of rape actually ends up in a conviction. There's something massively wrong in how Europe and the West are actually treating women who come with that allegation, because it does seem as if the system is designed to reject that as opposed to accept it and listen.
What shocks me most about this story is that hurt words are determined to be more harmful than rape. That's huge. That is insane. The fact that we've got there in Europe. We used to have, across all of our countries, we used to have blasphemy laws where you would be hung, drawn, and quartered, or you'd be left to swing if you were to blaspheme against the dominant religion of the day. And of course, that was wrong. And no one should be punished for questioning Christianity. But now we have the exact same laws in reverse. We have blasphemy laws that are called hate speech laws. We've brought them in across Europe. We've seen in Finland, Päivi Räsänen, a politician and grandmother of 12, has been on criminal trial for 5 years because she tweeted a Bible verse. We've seen in Mexico politicians who misgendered a colleague in their tweets have been convicted of gender-based political violence and forced by courts to apologize daily on X, on Twitter, for 15 days. This is insane that we have raised the stakes of the crime of blasphemy, of speaking out against dominant views of the day, of raising points that maybe most disagree with or that contradict an ideology or an orthodoxy. And we've raised them to a point that we think that is the most serious crime of our day. Now, do I think that every single person's opinion and view is necessarily of merit? Of course not. We all disagree with different things. I don't know the exact comment that was made in this case specifically, but I do know that any sort of hurtful word, any sort of opinion can be countered best with more speech, not no speech. Countering ideas that we don't like is best done when we can debate and show somebody a better position to have and talk them around to a different view, not to simply put them in a cell and throw away the key. But certainly we need to be highlighting this case. It underscores how far we have come in thinking that the worst crime that we can commit is a crime against the ideological views of our day.
It's the story of the week, I think, which I thought, what? Am I missing something? And you read it, and that's what's happening in our world. We'll get three more. We'll just do a few minutes on each. It is this one on birth rates that you'd retweeted. Birth rates in the world's rich economies have more than halved since 1960 to hit a record low, and it's showing the US, Australia, UK, Canada, and Italy there from the 60s all the way to the present day. And I guess a lot of governments don't really have family-friendly policies in place regarding the tax system, but also we're seeing a change in the expectation is not to get married when you're younger and then to have kids. It's actually, live for yourself, and it's this selfish mentality. But what were your thoughts whenever you saw this graph, which really does show that collapse?
Yeah, it's seriously concerning for the future of our country when the birth rate collapses. It's concerning on a very practical level. We have a country that depends on a welfare state. There are a lot of people depend on each other, and we depend on a class of workers in that middle age group. And to be able to be working, generating GDP, paying taxes, and supporting, say, care for the elderly, schools, hospitals, all these things. If we don't have that system in place, if we don't have that healthy middle demographic, we're going to run out of money pretty quickly. We're going to run out of resources pretty quickly. And if you're like me and not wanting to spend our old age being cared for by Henry Hoover with ChatGPT, then we better do something about it pretty quick. The birth rate also, if there's a pandemic of loneliness in our society already. Over a third of households in the UK are single occupant. And I don't think that is often by choice, but by circumstance. Of course, there are some people who prefer solitude, but I think many people, if they're honest, would say that this is the product of a society which is not investing in families, which is not valuing that, marriages, having kids, supporting people to do that. And the way that our maternity benefits have been structured under the most recent government has not been conducive to that either. Instead of supporting women to be able to have kids, to stay at home, to have the time and that extra time at home that they need to be able to raise kids at an early age. Instead, our system has been geared into getting them back into the workplace as soon as possible. And it's a mentality of the government that prioritizes GDP over raising the next generation, and it's been detrimental. It's seen a huge fall in the amount of children that women and men feel that they are supported to have. And it's seen a situation where many women, over 50%, are hitting 30 years old without having kids for the first time in history, and hitting 40 years old then with regrets that they have not been able to make that time or have that opportunity to have children. And so for the sake of a healthy society, for the sake of people not having regrets, for the sake of us being able to prop up everything we need as a society together, we need to be paying attention to this. We need to be solving our birth rate crisis. And that looks like supporting families better, giving women those options to stay at home if they need to, and allowing families to survive and thrive, to make it easier for them to buy a house, to pay their tax, and all of these things.
Yeah, it is concerning whenever governments just see us as cash cows and don't realise actually people are worth more than the money they have. But I think that's probably what we have going away from a Christian ethos of made in the image of God. Two other quick. One is something very different. This was Farage's Reform Party. Second and third COVID lockdowns, UK's biggest peacetime mistake. Reform UK leader tells Sunderland event that restrictions led to long-term economic and psychological damage. I'm surprised it has taken this long for people to realise. I actually wouldn't have gone for a first lockdown. That's a whole other issue. But actually, the damage the first one did to people in care homes, children with speech pattern issues now because they didn't go to school, couldn't see people's faces. It's a range, and the damage in employment, in jobs. You can only pay people to sit at home for so long until you run out of money as a company. But it's common sense, but I'm surprised that no one else is saying we need to ask questions. And on this issue, it seems though Reform are the only one that are willing to say, oh, let's find out and ask whether this was a good or bad thing, having these lockdowns.
It's very difficult for those who are responsible to be able to then question it, isn't it? So I suppose that's probably part of the issue in questioning this. And it wasn't only politicians that endorsed it, but obviously a lot of society believed in it as well and went along with it. And I think it's very difficult for us on a wide scale to look back and to really objectively assess if the right decisions were made at the time. Obviously, when the pandemic broke out, decisions had to be made very quickly, and we can kind of account for regrettable mistakes at the time. As time went on, we can see where evidence was coming from abroad, where we could have made adjustments to improve life, to improve community. And I especially have a particular care for the fact that churches were shut down for an incredibly long period of time compared to other institutions, for example, in Scotland, where liquor stores and bicycle shops were opened much, much earlier than churches. So I think mistakes were certainly made. I think anyone can, if they are honest, if they look back objectively, they can pull out parts of what happened. It might not all be the same for everybody, but we can all look at things that happened that shouldn't have. And it's important to have that objectivity that we can learn from in the future, that we don't make the same mistakes again. So I'm glad that this is coming into the political debate and narrative, and there's space to discuss it, because that is the most important thing, that we're able to have those open conversations.
Yeah, if only politicians who actually admit to mistakes. That would be a breakthrough. Let's do just this video, just a minute long, and then we'll just end with this, mentioning this in Ireland with the surrogacy bill. So let me just play this 1 minute clip.
Exciting day in the Shannon when we see the passing of the Assisted Human Reproduction Bill, which does loads of things for fertility treatment for couples and single people all over Ireland, but it particularly provides for a legislative framework for future families growing through surrogacy, both domestically and internationally. For families like me, it also has a provision whereby we have an opportunity now to go to the courts to apply for parental orders, because my family is grown through surrogacy. We have a daughter through surrogacy, and only her biological father, my husband, is acknowledged in law. Now, mammies like me and second dads all over the country who have children born by a surrogacy will have that opportunity to apply for parental orders. It is innovative, it is human rights based, it's based on the Verona Principles, which are internationally recognised principles that safeguard the rights of surrogate mothers, children born by a surrogacy and intended parents. It's really groundbreaking and a very exciting day.
So what were your thoughts on that? I hadn't come across that at all. I saw it on your Twitter timeline. We mentioned Ireland earlier on with mothers being protected in law. Tell us about your thoughts on the surrogacy bill to finish off with.
Well, every child has a mother and a father, and the surrogacy industry, I have a huge problem with. It takes advantage of parents with deep and well-meaning desires to have a family, but unfortunately it accomplishes that goal by inevitably separating a baby from the mother it knows for 9 months in the womb, and placing it into a situation where instead of the child's interests being prioritized, it's the parents' interests that are being prioritized. And I just think back every time I think about surrogacy to a clip that went viral a few months ago with a quivering little baby being taken from his mother and placed into, I think it was a trans-identifying person, a couple of biological males who are going to raise this little baby. And whatever ideological aspirations or faith one might have, the role of a mother in a child's life is so essential. I think we can all reflect on that. And there's tragedies where mothers are not able to look after their children, but we can all say in the majority of circumstances, mothers know best. Mothers are the people who are able to raise their children in the best way. And it was ironic that in Ireland, only a few months ago, the people voted to protect mothers in the constitution. And then the government now have decided that mothers don't matter, that women's bodies are simply ovens, gestational ovens that can be used to create these products to make couples happy, but not to serve the best interests of the child. And so I think this is a really terrible decision.
Well, Lois, thank you so much for joining us. As always, good to have your thoughts on all those stories. So thanks so much for your time today.
Of course, thank you so much.